Hi, I'm Erin, and this is week 6 of Communications 101, and we are on chapters 12, 13, and 14 of Speak Up. Chapter 12 talks about language and style, so that's your word choice and how you present them. Word choice is really important. They're very powerful, and you can either inform, inspire, and uplift your audience, or you'll confuse, offend, or bore them with your words if they're not chosen carefully. Words have a denotative and a connotative meaning. The denotative meaning is the literal dictionary definition, but when you're using a word, you have to keep in mind that sometimes they have more than one definition, so make sure it's clear which one you're using. Connotative meaning is what people associate with the word, so it may be completely different than what the word actually means, but that's what people think of when they think of that word. So, for example, bigotry is a big one that they use as an example in the book. People often associate it with racism, but that's not the literal meaning of the word. But you have to be careful because people are just going to think of the connotative meaning. So this can work in your favor, or it can offend someone. Like the word explosive, you can use to explain like how a trend was set, like how quickly it took off. So that's a good way you can use the connotative word, but you just have to be careful that you're not going to offend anyone with the connotative meaning of the word. Make sure you use understandable language, so keep it as simple as you possibly can. Don't use more words than you have to, and make sure that if you're using jargon, that you explain it clearly. You can use concrete words, so use more specific like descriptions of something so that they can get a better picture, but make sure they're helpful and relevant and not just excess words to fill up your time. And then make sure you use words properly, make sure they're pronounced properly, and you're using them in the proper grammar. Don't use run-on sentences. They work fine in a paper because you can go back and read them and make sure that you understand what the message is, but for a listener it's very confusing, so keep your sentences short and simple. So one way you can express your ideas effectively is repetition, so you can repeat words and phrases that you want them to hold on to that are key to your message, but use this sparingly, because if you repeat too many words in your presentation, it's kind of like crying wolf and you're just gonna completely confuse your audience. You can use hypothetical examples. You can use personal anecdotes, like examples from your own life that relate to the topic. You can use vivid language, like descriptive words and things that help the listener to visualize what you're trying to say. You can use figurative language. Those are different ways that you can effectively get your message across. Make sure you choose respectful and unbiased language, so avoid any stereotypes. Make sure you use gender-neutral references, so instead of her or him, you can use they. Make appropriate references to ethnic groups, so don't call African Americans black, things like that. And avoid, if it's not necessary for you to refer to someone's ethnicity or their religion or their gender, just leave it out completely. It's not necessary for it to be in there. Okay, chapter 13, delivering your speech. So there's different ways you can deliver your speech. You can read from a manuscript, you can memorize it, or you can speak from an outline. So reading from a manuscript has disadvantages because your paper will be a prop and it will get in the way of you using hand gestures and different aids and things. So that's one of the disadvantages. One advantage is if you have a very specific message to get across, and say you're having to tread lightly and you don't want to be misquoted or anything like that, like in a press conference, you would use a manuscript just for safety reasons. Another thing you can do is memorize. Memorizing is not the best because it sounds kind of like a commercial, like you're trying to get them to buy something. It seems pre-packaged and canned. It doesn't seem genuine and natural. So memorizing is not the best option, but same thing with, similar to reading from a manuscript, it helps for safety reasons so that you're not misquoted or say something that people can take the wrong way. Speaking from an outline is the best way because it's more natural and you're not glued to your notes. You have more freedom to move around and you can adapt your message as you need to. Okay, verbal delivery skills. So that includes volume. If you're in a room, you need to make sure that the people in the back can hear you as well as the people in the front, and that you're not making the person in the front deaf. Tone is also important. It adds variety to your speech and some warmth, and it just sounds more natural and it's more personal. So adding a variety in tones is very helpful. But make sure you use it properly, otherwise you're going to sound like a teenage boy whose voice is changing. And that can be very distracting. Your rate of delivery, that means not speaking too fast or too slow. And make sure that you project. So if you don't have a microphone, one thing you can do is use the air that you exhale to carry the sound of your voice across the room. So it's kind of like when you're singing, they say to sing from your diaphragm. It's the same idea. Make sure you say things clearly, that you're articulating, that you're pronouncing things properly. If you don't know how to pronounce something, then look it up. You can use the dictionary, or you can go online, and online dictionaries will have an option to listen to how the word sounds. You can use pauses to your advantage. Don't leave them too long, but you can use them as an opportunity to let people think about what you said and the impact of what you're trying to say. You can also use non-verbal delivery skills, which we've talked about before, like eye contact with your audience. Make sure you try to pan across the room, kind of like your head's a tripod. Just making eye contact with your whole audience as best as you can. Hand gestures, that's not just your hands, but also the movement of your head and the expression on your face. Make sure you're not being misinterpreted. Use them properly and intentionally. Physical movement. So if you're standing up at a pulpit, you don't want to be a tree and just stand in one spot. You can walk around a little bit but use it again deliberately so that it ties in with your presentation and that it's not distracting. Another thing you can use to your advantage is proxemics. I've seen people do this in sermons where they come out from behind the pulpit so that they can make a more personal point. And then make sure you're dressed appropriately for the setting. So if you're going to a business meeting and you have to give a presentation, make sure you're dressed for the occasion. But say you're with a bunch of teenagers and you're going to give a Bible lesson in a youth group, you're not going to want to wear fancy clothes. Obviously, you're going to want to wear something that makes you feel relatable to them. So chapter 14 is about using presentation aids. They can add a lot to your presentations. There's a lot of different types. You can use yourself. You can do different demonstrations. You can get an assistant from the audience. You can use objects. You can use visual aids like maps, pictures, diagrams, graphs, pie charts. And there's text-based visuals, which is like a PowerPoint. Say you want to highlight a scripture verse, you could put it up on the PowerPoint so that they can read along with you. You could use audio sounds, say you're talking about a different species of bird, so that they know what they sound like, or a video. But you want to use technology very wisely. You don't want it to distract from the main point, which is your oral presentation. That's the main point of delivery. And then the other stuff should just help to unify and to add interest to the presentation. So you don't want them to distract from your oral presentation. Obviously, the content is more important than all these aids. So make sure your content is good, and then all the visual aids come in next. They support the oral content. So when you're using presentation aids, you want to consider the forum that you're in, what's available to you in the room that you're using, things like that. You also want to consider your audience and what they would appreciate seeing and hearing. What's their demographics? What if they already seen? Don't reuse the same pictures, poster children, for different causes and things like that. Make sure it's, something new and different to get their attention. And some questions you can ask yourself is, have my audience seen or heard this before? What was the result of this exposure? And if it was ineffective, why was it ineffective? And what can I do differently? Make sure your aids support your points. Keep them simple and clear. If they have to stare at it for a long time to figure it out, then there's a problem. If it's not clear enough, if there's too much going on a graph, then they're going to get totally lost and distracted and miss your oral presentation because they're looking at the screen. So when you're using presentation aids during your speech, well, first you want to rehearse them beforehand to see how it goes so that you're aware of any possible glitches. And then once you get to the presentation, make sure everyone can see and hear the different things that you're going to show from all angles of the room. Control audience interaction with the aids. So if you're going to pass out a handout, make sure you tell them to hold off looking at it until you're ready to present it. Otherwise, they'll be looking at the aid the whole time. And then don't rely too heavily on them. Because again, the main vehicle of your message is your oral presentation, and everything else is just supposed to support it. So that's chapters 12, 13, and 14.